Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, scholars and dignitaries, welcome to another episode. Welcome to my world. So the question is there a relationship between marijuana use and suicidal ideation, and even more important, between marijuana use and suicide itself? After all, we're seeing an absolute explosion in marijuana use and in very strong and high-grade marijuana ever since the states decided to go to legalization. Suicide is the act of taking one's own life. Suicidal ideation is thinking about, talking about, or planning actions related to ending one's own life. And to be honest, suicidal thoughts and behaviors should be considered serious, very serious, and a person really needs to see and consult a counselor. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. I want to say that again. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Of the hundreds, if not thousands, of people I've known that have experienced some degree of depression from mild to severe, there was no reason for any of them to commit suicide. I know what the risk factors are: depression, experiencing jail or prison, losing your job, financial problems, hopelessness, and social isolation. But even with one or more of these, if you've had thoughts of suicide, you have to know that there are options. There are many options, even if you don't see them, and you need to know that suicide is not a solution to personal problems. So, where does that bring us? According to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, suicide has been increasing and is now the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. Globally, suicide is now the second leading cause of death among 18 to 24-year-olds, eclipsed only by motor vehicle accidents. Well, there is a definite case where suicidal ideation is triggered by one very specific risk factor, and too many people who never would have attempted or committed suicide did so, not because of a clear and conscious choice, but because they were influenced by drug-induced emotions, drug-enhanced emotions, drug-contaminated emotions. You know this. Both drug use and drug intoxication are primary risk factors for suicide. In fact, one of the primary causative factors. Take marijuana specifically. Marijuana is a powerful mood modifying, mind altering drug whose effects are idiosyncratic and rely greatly upon the set and setting of use. While a number of causative factors have been identified, the Centers for Disease Control clearly reports, and others confirm, that substance abuse is one of those factors. A second finding is that the substance use itself, including marijuana use, may facilitate the transition from suicidal ideation to actual suicidal behavior completion. Someone who is depressed but not suicidal may decide otherwise if under the influence, and of course, the more chronic the use, the more problems one suffer, which tends to invite and enhance suicide as the only viable way out of the circumstances. So, one of the biggest studies of its kind on marijuana use and long-term outcomes looked at data from three large, long-running longitudinal studies. Researchers found that after controlling for 53 different factors, ranging from socioeconomic differences to mental health, young adults who use marijuana more frequently before age 17 were more likely to have worse outcomes by age 30 for several categories of problems, including the number of suicide attempts. In fact, youth who use marijuana daily were 7 times more likely to attempt suicide. 7 times. The findings showed clear and consistent associations between the frequency of adolescent cannabis use and all adverse young adult outcomes, and especially suicide, and the associations had dose-response characteristics across all categories, with the strongest effects shown for daily users. Another study, a large-scale epidemiological study funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, also found that people who smoke marijuana before age 17 are 3.5 times more likely to attempt suicide as those who started smoking marijuana later in life. In addition, people who are dependent on marijuana also have a higher risk of experiencing major depression and suicidal thoughts and behaviors. A recent report from the Colorado Center for Health shows that suicide where marijuana is present has increased over 350% in that state for youth and adults, with marijuana being the number one substance now found in suicides of young people in Colorado who are 10 to 19 years old. And in a study released through the Journal of the American Medical Association Psychiatry, researchers found that teenagers who used cannabis were at a higher risk of both experiencing depression and of attempting suicide. To investigate the potential mental health risks of using marijuana, researchers reviewed numerous studies featuring a total of 23,317 participants. Those who had used cannabis were found to be more likely to experience depression, suicidal thoughts, and attempt to take their lives. The authors concluded that, quote, the high prevalence of adolescents consuming cannabis generates a large number of young people who could develop depression and suicidality specifically attributable to cannabis. Here's one example to show the real relationship between marijuana and suicide, and just to say that I personally know several of these cases, and there are thousands more just like it. Johnny was born in February of 2001 in California. He was happy, funny, handsome, talented, and extremely intelligent. He actually received a perfect score on his SATs for college. He had a 4.0 GPA and earned a scholarship to college. He loved animals, video games, school, the beach, his friends, and his family. In other words, he was a perfectly normal boy with a wonderful life and a bright future. Johnny killed himself when he was 19 years old. When he was 14 years old, recreational marijuana was legalized in his state, and suddenly it was everywhere and easy to get. Johnny thought it would help him with his social anxiety. He started smoking and later dabbing marijuana, which is a high THC wax extract. And that triggered bizarre episodes of marijuana induced psychosis and eventually full blown schizophrenia. He suffered from persecutory and delusional thinking. He thought the FBI wanted him for terrorism. He kept saying the world knew about him. He thought the mob had it in for him, that his parents were a part of the conspiracy to destroy him, and so on. 3 days before he died, he told his mother, I need to tell you that you were right about the marijuana and the drugs. You told me weed would hurt my brain, and it's ruined my mind and my life. I'm sorry, and I love you. He died by suicide 3 days later. Again, these stories are becoming very common around the human service agencies that deal with grief and loss, and everyone knows it's marijuana causing these sudden, uncharacteristic, and dramatic changes. So, what's the takeaway? Simple. Don't use marijuana. It exacerbates depression, anxiety, and especially suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Hey, be safe, be well, and remember a life is a terrible thing to waste, especially on drugs. And may God bless.